Hello, everyone, and thanks for coming out again about the Monroe Doctrine in U.S. foreign policy. The goal here is to talk about, well, not just the Monroe Doctrine, but even more. Now, remember, the Monroe Doctrine is key to understanding U.S. foreign policy, particularly not just in Latin America, but elsewhere. Let me explain that. Remember, what James Monroe was basically saying was he didn't want European powers encroaching in U.S. territory. Well, it's backyard. They'll just say a sphere of influence, but it's not just a sphere of influence, it's actually the backyard. And this is very important because Great Britain took over huge coastal areas. People forget of Nicaragua, Honduras, Belize speaks English, and all these other areas speak a different kind of English. And obviously France had Haiti. It's the reason why it speaks French. And obviously the whole area was colonized by Spain and also Brazil, Portugal. So it started thinking as it became a rising power, hey, we want this sphere of influence. So it was laughed at. A lot of people found it risible because the United States wasn't a power at the time, but we really started exerting our pressure on Latin America. And the Monroe Doctrine has been essentially invoked to do a lot of horrible things in Latin America. Now, as someone who studies Latin American politics, the United States, not just the United States, but obviously what's going on now with Russia, hegemonic powers are usually pretty brutal in their neighborhoods, right? So it's not just a US thing, but the United States has used like this idea of the Monroe Doctrine to do horrible things like, install the Somoza dynasty for over 30 years in Nicaragua, to basically create a coup or at least facilitate one in Panama so they'd break from Colombia so we could get the Panamanian Canal, overthrow the democratically elected Arbenz in Guatemala in 1954, overthrow Allende, democratically elected in Chile, and just so many more just horrific policies. But so the Monroe Doctrine became not in our backyard. You cannot go there. And later, the UK almost fought the United States over Venezuela because Venezuela owed Great Britain money. And it was that the United States invoked the Monroe Doctrine and then came up with another one where Roosevelt came up with the Roosevelt Corollary. So the idea, that was 1904, and that's when the United States would, using quotes, that's entre comillas, quotes, exercise international police power in Latin America, which was basically our sphere of influence, our backyard. And obviously, Roosevelt, probably some of you helped create a coup in Panama to break away from Colombia. Now, his argument, that is Theodore Roosevelt, was, well, there was always a coup brewing there, but there's a coup brewing everywhere. And obviously you couldn't get, and you still can't, from Colombia on land to Panama, even though they're connected. So, but we did help facilitate that coup. A lot of people don't know, and this is going to be a big part, is that Nicaragua was actually the main place people wanted to build the canal, but we already had money invested in Panama that was kind of lost before because it failed initially, creating this huge canal. But the investors lobbied the administration to the extent to which the U.S. administration that they decided not to go with Nicaragua. They wanted to go with Panama. Nicaragua was a much better choice with Rio San Juan, etc. But in addition to the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, I want to basically stress the Spanish-American War of 1898, which where I am now, San Juan, Puerto Rico. Look at how beautiful it is. I'm not there now, but I took this picture on one of the fortresses. They have another one, I think it's San Felipe, Castillos. They have, that's castles, just a broad range of castles. And it's very interesting because this is one of the last ones that really stood the test of time, where you have fortifications throughout Puerto Rico. You also have one which you'll see a video on me in El Castillo in Colombia. And these are like national heritage sites. They're beautiful. But the point of this is, I think the Spanish-American War of 1898 was when the United States really became an empire, right? Because you basically have this power growing. And then when we were able to defeat the Spanish, we took lots of land. What do we get? Guam, Cuba through the Platt Amendment. We basically governed it. The Philippines, although there was a movement not to keep it. I want to say Hawaii, etc. So we got all this land after defeating Spain. And we basically said, this is now 100% our backyard, right? So it was really the Spanish-American War, although this isn't a history class, that's why we'll go over it really quickly, that really secured the US dominance in the region and beyond. And one of the things is there were a lot of battles, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and other places that we fought. Well, not me personally, but I'm not that old. But so this really gave us dominance over the region. And why? But we've used it as a pretext, particularly democracy and propaganda, to say, oh, we need to go into, say, Cuba, right, and overthrow Castro. But we were supporting Batista, a brutal government before, that allowed the mafia basically to control Cuba. That was one of the reasons. In fact, Castro was democratically elected in a local election. And when he didn't win, he realized the only way is to create a revolution. So we use a lot of pretexts like democracy, but it really isn't democracy, right? When the Sandinistas took over in 1979, we said, hey, they're not democratic. This is a revolution. We need to support this group, the Contra, and we were taken to the International Court of Justice and lost. A lot of people don't know if it's supporting terrorism, economic, just destroying the economy of Nicaragua throughout the 1980s. And what's interesting is we were supporting the brutal Somoza dynasty that actually killed Bill Stewart, a U.S. journalist. We had no problem with, supporting these brutal governments, Pinochet of Chile, Stroessner of Paraguay, Hugo Banzer, I want to say, who had Nazis in his government, in Bolivia, because a lot of Nazis went down to South America after World War II. So we use the idea of democracy, but usually that's not the case. And it's the same thing all the time. Like, we complain about what's going on in Venezuela, which is fine to complain about what's going on in Venezuela, analyze it, criticize it, etc. But we supported a man named Carlos Andrés Perez, who killed up to 3,000 innocent Venezuelans during what they call Caracazo in the early 1990s, or I want to say late 1980s, sorry, because George Bush, the first, was actually president then. And we supported it wholeheartedly, right? The World Bank supported, the IMF supported. So we tried to control this area through propaganda. And I think it's very similar to what's going on now. I relate things to like the Russian and Ukrainian crisis, where, Russia's trying to say, oh, the Ukrainians, we have to denazify the Ukraine, we have to invade, etc. Now, obviously, that's ludicrous, right? Zelensky's Jewish, but there is a Nazi presence in Ukraine, right? There are a lot of right wingers, but the idea to invade the whole country is crazy. But we use the same crazy arguments in places like Guatemala. I want to show that video I showed in national security to show propaganda. We did it in Nicaragua, even though they weren't communist. We did it initially in Cuba. It's absolutely ludicrous that we basically do the same thing. We say there are communists everywhere, so we have to support death squads in El Salvador in order to defend ourselves from communists. So I see a lot of similarity. You do not have to agree with me. That's one of the great things about my class. I welcome dissent. But we kind of use that propaganda in order to control our own backyard. And that's what I think Russia's doing. Russia's saying we have to denazify the Ukraine, right? We have to go in and take it over. We have to overthrow the government. But we've done this a number of times. We supported the overthrow of Hugo Chavez, who was democratically elected in 2002. So if we don't like a government, we'll always make a pretext. And I think all governments are like that, right? I think governments who are hegemonic powers will invade. Like I always say, Vietnam, after kicking us out, was able to invade Cambodia. Now, Pol Pot was horrible, that government, the Khmer, but they went in, kicked out Pol Pot and the Khmer and installed their own Vietnamese puppet government. So governments do this stuff all the time. It's not something new. And with the Monroe Doctrine, Roosevelt Corollary, it's a corollary. That's a difficult word to say. And then obviously the Spanish-American War, we basically started saying, this is our backyard. No one can be here but us. And anytime there's a government we don't like, whether it's democratic or not, we try to overthrow it. But the United States has been kind of more clever. It uses economic tools, the CIA, like going into Chile to overthrow the democratically elected government of Allende, and then installing the brutal Pinochet. Did it, through clandestine means. The same thing with the Contra. They were a ragtag group of people from the Somoza dynasty and others who tried to overthrow the Sandinistas, but they were in rural areas, so they could never really do it. And the Nicaraguan government at the time in the 1980s took us to the International Court of Justice and actually won. And we just ignored the ICJ, that is the International Court of Justice ruling. So, this whole idea of this is our backyard has been pretty strong, I think, with hegemonic powers. And that's very important to understand U.S. foreign policy. And when NATO was expanding into, what Russia would consider its sphere of influence, it kind of, started expanding as well. Now, you don't have to buy into that argument. I don't personally support the Ukrainian war, but Mearsheimer would make that argument and blames the West. I wouldn't go that far, but, that's an argument to be considered. And now China is basically thinking about, and I was there at the time, it was very interesting, building a canal through Nicaragua. It hasn't really taken hold yet, but if China is able to get a canal in Nicaragua, that will expand its region. As we talked about before, China's building islands in the South China Sea. That's very strategic, because then you expand not only your nautical mileage, but you also have a lot of areas for bases, refueling, etc. So this is very, very interesting that China is taking a foothold in Nicaragua, where I lived 8 years of my life. I was a professor at La Universidad Centroamericana, that's Jesuit de Jesuit, the University of Central America, which you'll be seeing some videos on that. So, this is very, very interesting, the expansion of the United States. This isn't a history class, so I'll end there, but it is interesting on how the unique development of the United States and foreign policy kind of took over. This is Puerto Rico behind me. Unfortunately, I am not there. I am stuck in hot Arizona, where the only place to swim, besides the pool I have, yes, I'm ruining the environment, is Tempe Town Lake. So I'll end there for you people to see. And then there might be another virtual background with that. Oh yeah, this is a good one. I think I just paused there because I changed it, but this is from the outside. It's pretty cool. You can see how Spain wasn't stupid. They fortified all their areas, and we're going to see more with walls. That's again still Puerto Rico. Yes, I roll the R's. But how scared they were about pirates, invasions by the UK, the United States, etc., and how they dedicated so many resources to walls, which gets into the debate: should we have a wall or not? It didn't seem to work in this case, because we kicked some Spanish butt. No offense to the Spanish people out there, but we did win. Thank God. No, I'm kidding. Gracias a Dios. But anyways, I'm only teasing you. But that's it. So think of these kind of historical events that kind of led to the United States to be a growing, without the lack of a better word, empire, and kind of get this kind of sphere of influence, and then go beyond its sphere of influence we can't even list the invasions, outside of the United States, outside of Latin America, where we invaded Nicaragua, Haiti. So many different countries, and historically just has had troops in Nicaragua for like over 20 years. Same thing with Haiti. And then we obviously Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, we invade. I mean, so many other countries. And this is key to understanding US foreign policy. So without further ado, thanks for coming out. If you have any questions, please leave them in the community forum. Take care, everyone. And I wish I was in Puerto Rico on the beach.